The wind in the Texas Panhandle did not just blow. It chewed. It possessed teeth made of red grit and dry heat, gnawing at the wooden sidings of Larkspur until the paint peeled back like dead skin. It was the year 1874, or perhaps 1875. Time moved differently out here, where the law was thinner than the paper in a Bible. The town of Larkspur clung to the edge of the Indian Territory like a tick on a stray dog, drawing its lifeblood from cheap whiskey, anxious rumors, and the heavy silver coins paid out for human heads. Tabe sat astride his gelding on the ridge overlooking the settlement. The horse was a sturdy roan, chosen for endurance rather than speed, though it had enough of both to keep a man alive. Tabe was young, perhaps 24 or 25, but his eyes held the weary depth of a man who had seen too many winters turn into starving springs. He wore the dust of the trail like a second shirt. He had spent the season scouting for the Army, a job that paid in hard currency but cost him pieces of his soul. He had guided men in blue coats through the canyons, showing them water sources and game trails, always keeping his face impassive when they spoke of destiny and ownership. He adjusted the brim of his hat, watching a buckboard wagon rattle down the main street of Larkspur. The sound of iron wheels grinding against the gravel carried clearly in the thin air. He did not like this town. It smelled of desperation and unwashed ambition, but he needed supplies, and he needed to hear what the wind was whispering in the places where men gathered to drink and boast. He had a debt to pay, not in money, but in blood. It was an old debt, tied to a family that had been burned out of their winter lodge 2 years ago. The man responsible was down there, somewhere among the clapboard buildings and the false fronts. Tabe touched the scar on his forearm, a jagged line hidden beneath his sleeve. He was done with the warpath in the traditional sense. He did not seek to kill every white man he saw. That was a fool's game that ended with the people starving on reservations. But specific men who made cruelty their trade, that was different. That was gardening. You pulled the weeds so the grass could grow. Down in the valley, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long, bruised shadows across the dust. Tabe nudged the roan forward. The horse picked its way down the slope, hoofbeats muffled by the scrub brush. He would ride in quietly. He would listen. And he would remember that the promises of white men were like the morning mist gone the moment the heat rose. Inside the parsonage, Eleanor Hart, known to the town as Nell, sat by the window. She was 22 years old, an age by which most women in the territory were already mothers of 3 or buried under a wooden cross. Nell was neither. She was the Reverend's daughter, a title that felt less like a distinction and more like a heavy wool coat worn in high summer. She held a needle and thread, mending a tear in her father's Sunday vest. The rhythm was soothing, but her mind was miles away, out past the glass pane where the horizon stretched forever. She had been taught that the horizon was dangerous. It was where the savages lived. It was where girls who lost their virtue ended up wandering and lost. Nell? Her father's voice cut through her thoughts. Reverend Hart stood in the doorway. He was a tall man who wore his piety like armor, stiff and unyielding. He loved her. She knew that. But it was a love mixed with a terrifying fear of what the world might say about him if she faltered. Deputy Kincaid will be coming for supper at 6 of the clock. Make sure the roast is not dry this time. Yes, Father, Nell said, her voice soft. It was the voice of a good girl, a compliant girl. He is a good man, Nell, the Reverend said, stepping into the room and adjusting his cuffs. A man of the law. He can offer you safety. In these times, a woman cannot ask for more than a roof that does not burn and a man who carries a badge. Safety. The word tasted like day-old porridge. Nell looked down at her hands. They were pale, unblemished hands. The hands of a woman who was kept inside. Deputy Kincaid had damp palms and eyes that lingered on her chest when he thought she was not looking. He spoke of land deeds and fence lines, and he looked at her the way he looked at a heifer he was considering buying at auction. I know. Father, she replied. Do not look so sullen, he chided gently, walking over to pat her shoulder. His hand was heavy. "It is for your own good. Clayton Rusk is in town again. You know what happens when his men get restless. A woman alone is a target. A deputy's wife is untouchable." At the mention of Clayton Rusk, a chill went down Nell's spine that had nothing to do with the drafty window. Rusk. The name was whispered in Larkspur like a curse. He was a bounty hunter, but that title was too polite for what he really was. He was a butcher who had realized he could sell the meat. "Is he staying long?" Nell asked, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "Until he clears out the vermin, as he calls them," her father said, turning back to his study. "Stay away from the windows tonight, Nell. The devil walks on two legs in this town." Nell waited until his footsteps faded before she looked out again. Far to the south, past the last livery stable, stood the old signal station. It was a ruin now, a skeleton of timber and burnt stone from the days before the war. The roof had collapsed on one side, and the walls were scorched black. People said ghosts lived there. Nell did not fear ghosts. She feared the living. The signal station was where the town left messages. Sometimes it was a lover's note tucked into a chink in the stone. Sometimes it was a warning. She felt a sudden, fierce urge to tear off her high-collared dress and run until her lungs burned. To run toward that broken station and keep going until she found a place where no one knew she was the Reverend's daughter. But she did not move. She picked up the needle. She was Nell Hart. She was good. She was safe. And she was slowly suffocating. By the time Tabe reached the edge of Larkspur, the sun had bled out into a deep purple twilight. He tied his horse behind the livery, tossing a coin to the stable boy who looked at him with wide, suspicious eyes. Tabe ignored the boy. He adjusted his gun belt. He carried a Colt Navy revolver, the grip worn smooth by use, and a knife in a sheath at the small of his back. He walked down the boardwalk, his boots making a heavy, deliberate sound on the planks. The air here was thick with the smell of coal smoke and frying grease. He pushed through the swinging doors of the largest saloon, the Gilded Spur. The noise hit him like a physical wave. A piano was being punished in the corner, playing a tune that was lively but lacked soul. Men stood shoulder to shoulder at the bar, their voices raised in laughter that sounded more like barking. Tabe moved to a table in the back, sitting with his back to the wall. He ordered a whiskey and nursed it, his eyes scanning the room, and then he saw him. Clayton Rusk was holding court at a large round table near the front. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, wearing a coat that cost more than most men in the room earned in 5 years. His face was hidden behind a thick beard, but his eyes were visible pale, cold, and utterly devoid of mercy. He was surrounded by his cavalry, a group of hard-eyed men who looked like they would shoot their own mothers for $1. "I tell you," Rusk was saying, his voice booming over the din, "civilization is a garden. You have to pull up the roots if you want the roses to grow. These Comanches, they do not understand fences. They do not understand property. So we have to teach them." "With a rope?" one of his men asked. Grinning, Rusk laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. "Fire and rope. It is the only language a savage speaks. I have investors coming from the east in 3 months. They want to see grazing land. Boys, not buffalo wallows, not teepees. They want empty, green land, and I intend to give it to them." Tabe's hand tightened on his glass. He remembered the smell of burning hide. He remembered the screams of a woman as her lodge collapsed around her. This was the man. At the bar, May Barlow was wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen better days. She was a woman of indeterminate age, with hair the color of rusted iron and a face that had been etched by hard laughter and harder sorrow. She ran the Gilded Spur with an iron fist and a shotgun she kept under the counter. She saw everything, and she said nothing. Usually, she caught Tabe's eye. She knew him, though they had never spoken more than a few words. She knew what he was. She gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. A warning. "Don't start trouble here. Not tonight." Tabe nodded slightly. He was not here to start a war in a barroom. He was here to learn. Rusk slammed his hand on the table. "But it is not just the savages out on the plains," he shouted. playing to the room now. "It is the sympathizers right here among us, the ones who trade with them, the ones who think we can coexist. They rot in the wood." The room went quiet. Even the piano player stopped. "We need to send a message," Rusk said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried to every corner. "A message that Larkspur is a white man's town, a clean town. Who did you have in mind, Mr. Rusk?" asked a nervous-looking merchant standing near the bar. Rusk smiled. "Oh, I have a candidate. Someone who has been friendly with the enemy. We will have a little ceremony soon. A purification." May Barlow dropped a glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound sharp and shocking in the silence. "Slippery fingers," she muttered, bending down to clean it up. But Tabe saw her hands shaking. Tabe finished his drink in one swallow. The whiskey burned, but the cold knot in his stomach remained. A purification. He knew what that meant. It meant hanging. It meant someone was going to die to make Clayton Rusk feel powerful and to make the town feel safe. He stood up and walked out, keeping his head down. As he passed the bar, May Barlow leaned over as if to wipe a spill near his elbow. "They mean to do it tomorrow night," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "At the old signal station. They are looking for a scapegoat. Anyone will do, as long as it scares the rest." "Who?" Taby asked, his voice a low rumble. "I do not know," May said, looking fearfully at Rusk's table. "But I heard them say they want a show. They want someone pure to make the sin look blacker." Tabe stepped out into the night air. It was cold now, the wind having sharpened its teeth on the darkness. He looked toward the signal station. It stood black against the stars, a jagged tooth in the mouth of the valley. A show. A lesson. He walked back to his horse. He should ride on. He should go back to the deep canyons where the water was sweet and the white men were few. It was not his fight. These people ate their own. Let them. But then he remembered the vow he had made over the smoking ruins of his friend's home. No more lessons. He mounted the roan. He would not leave. Not yet. He would watch the signal station. If Rusk wanted to send a message, Tabe would be there to read it. And perhaps, if the spirits were willing, he would edit it. Back in the parsonage, the dinner with Deputy Kincaid was an exercise in torture. The roast was dry. Despite Nell's best efforts, the deputy chewed with his mouth open, talking about the new ordinance against stray dogs. "We shot 3 of them today," Kincaid said, wiping grease from his chin. "Nuisance, that is what they are. Mr. Rusk says we should clear the streets entirely." "Mr. Rusk seems to run this town now," Nell said, surprising herself. Her father shot her a warning look. "Mr. Rusk is a businessman. Nell, he brings capital. He brings hangings," Nell said. Kincaid stopped chewing. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "Justice, Miss Hart. He brings justice. There are elements in this territory that do not respect the law. They need to see that there are consequences." "And who decides the consequences?" Nell asked. "You or him?" "Nell," her father's voice was a crack of thunder, "apologize to the deputy immediately. You speak of things you do not understand." Nell looked at the 2 men. Her father, terrified of losing his standing. The deputy, terrified of being anything less than a tyrant's lackey. "I apologize," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I have a headache. May I be excused?" She did not wait for an answer. She went to her room and locked the door. She paced the small floor, feeling the walls pressing in. 4 steps one way, 4 steps back. A cage. It was a cage. She went to the window. The signal station was barely visible now, just a shadow darker than the night. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. "I will not end up like this," she whispered to the empty room. "I will not be a deputy's wife who nods and smiles while they shoot dogs and hang men." She did not know how she would escape. She had no money, no horse, no weapon, but the seed of rebellion, planted deep in her heart by years of silence, was beginning to crack its shell. Out in the darkness, Tabe settled into a grove of juniper trees a few hundred yards from the signal station. He wrapped his blanket around his shoulders and waited. The wind howled through the broken structure. making it sound as if the wood were screaming. He watched the town lights flicker and die out, one by one, until only the saloon and the jailhouse remained awake. The world was holding its breath. Taibi closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of the earth, the scuttle of a lizard, the distant cry of a coyote. He did not know that less than a mile away, a girl was staring at the same darkness, praying for a storm to break the suffocating calm. He did not know her name, and she did not know his. But the threads of their lives were being pulled together by the rough hands of Clayton Rusk, tightening into a knot that would either hold them fast or hang them high. The night deepened. The wind did not stop. It scoured the land, preparing it for fresh blood. Tabe checked his revolver one last time, spinning the cylinder. It clicked a sound loud and final in the silence. He was ready. Whatever the morning brought, he would meet it standing up. In the tavern, the laughter had died down, replaced by the serious murmuring of men plotting violence. Rusk sat back in his chair, lighting a cigar. The smoke drifted up, curling toward the ceiling like a snake. "Tomorrow," Rusk said softly to his men, "tomorrow we light a fire that they will see all the way to the Red River." May Barlow, washing the last glass, shivered. She looked at the door where the Comanche had exited. She hoped he was far away. She hoped he was smart enough to run, but she remembered his eyes. They were not the eyes of a runner. They were the eyes of a hunter. "God help us all," she whispered, and blew out the lamp. The town of Larkspur slept, but it was a fitful sleep, full of bad dreams and the grinding of teeth. And in the center of it all, the abandoned signal station stood waiting, its charred wood hungry for a new story to be burned into its grain. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the first act was about to end in fire. The morning broke not with the warmth of the sun, but with a gray, bruised light that bled over the horizon, bringing a frost that coated the sagebrush in silver. Taibi had not slept. He had spent the night listening to the wind and the distant, unsettling silence of the town. When the first true light touched the summit of the mesas, he mounted the roan and rode toward the abandoned signal station. He told himself he was just checking the trail, ensuring his path out of this territory was clear. But the knot in his stomach told a different truth. As the structure came into view, the wind died down, leaving a heavy stillness. The signal station was a husk of burnt timber and stone, a monument to failures past. But something new had been added to the ruin. Taibi pulled the reins, the leather creaking in his grip. Suspended from a jutting beam of the collapsed roof was a shape. It spun slowly, a macabre pendulum in the morning air. It was a person, hands bound behind their back, a hood of burlap over their head. Beneath the hanging figure, the double doors of the station had been barred shut. On the weathered wood, written in thick, black charcoal, were words meant to scream louder than the victim ever could. Comanche lover. The letters were large, they were meticulous. Whoever had written them had taken their time, curving the spine of the S and crossing the E with the steady hand of a schoolteacher or a clerk. It was hatred disguised as penmanship. Tabe dismounted, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened earth. He did not run. Running drew the eye. He walked with the fluid, stalking the gait of a predator. As he neared the swinging figure, he saw the boots small, fine leather, scuffed and ruined. A woman's boots. He looked up. The rope was taut, creaking against the wood. And then he saw it. A shudder. The chest of the figure hitched. It was a small movement, a desperate fight for air against the constricting noose. But it was there. She was not dead, not yet. Taibi moved. He drew the knife from the small of his back, the blade flashing dull in the gray light. He scrambled up a pile of fallen masonry, reaching for the rope. He did not know who was under the hood, but he knew the cruelty of the knot. It was not a hangman's knot meant to break the neck instantly. It was a slip knot, designed to strangle slowly, to prolong the agony for hours. With one savage slice, he severed the hemp. He dropped his knife and caught the body as it fell. the sudden weight of her nearly knocking him off balance. He absorbed the impact with his knees, his arms wrapping around her waist. She was light, terrifyingly so, like a bird with hollow bones. He laid her on the flat stone of the station's porch. His hands worked quickly, loosening the noose that had bitten deep into her throat. He pulled the burlap hood away. Taby froze. The face was pale, turning a sickly blue around the lips, framed by hair the color of wheat that was now matted with dark, sticky blood where a pistol butt or a rock had struck her. It was Eleanor Hart, the Reverend's daughter, the girl he had seen through the window, the one the town held up as a porcelain doll of virtue. Her eyes were closed, her breathing ragged and shallow, sounding like dry leaves scraping together. "Breathe," Tabe commanded, his voice rough. "Breathe, white girl." Crack! The sound of the rifle shot arrived a split second after the bullet kicked up a spray of red dust 3 inches from Tabe's boot. Tabe did not look for the shooter. He knew the tactic. They left the bait alive to draw out the wolves. He was the wolf, and the trap had just snapped shut. He scooped Nell up into his arms. She groaned, a sound of pure pain, her head lolling against his shoulder. Another shot rang out, this one whining off the stone wall above his head, sending stone chips raining down on them. "Hold on," he growled. He ran for the roan. The horse was skittish, dancing sideways at the sound of gunfire, but it held its ground when Taby whistled sharp and low. He threw Nell over the saddle horn, vaulting up behind her in one fluid motion. He spurred the horse, not away from the station, but around it, putting the stone structure between them and the sniper on the ridge. The roan surged forward, muscles bunching and releasing. They scrambled down a shale slope, sliding more than riding, dust billowing around them. Tabe kept one arm clamped around Nell's waist, feeling the fragile flutter of her heart against his forearm. They rode hard for 10 minutes, weaving through the labyrinth of juniper and sandstone, until the sounds of pursuit faded into the vastness of the plains. But Taby knew better than to stop. Rusk would have men on horses, not just a lone sniper. Nell shifted in front of him. She was waking up, pulled from the darkness by the jarring rhythm of the gallop. She thrashed weakly, her hands clawing at his arm. "No!" she rasped, her voice destroyed by the rope. "No! Be still!" Tabe said near her ear. "I have you." She turned her head, her eyes wide and unfocused, glazed with trauma and fever. She did not see him. She saw a nightmare. She saw the men who had dragged her from her bed. "Don't! Bring me back!" she choked out, grabbing his shirt with a strength born of terror. "Don't take me home!" Taby frowned, glancing down at the girl who should have been begging for her father. "You are safe. I am taking you away from the shooting. Not home!" she cried out, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "Father, he let them. They said they would fix me. They said they would fix me right." The words hit Tabe harder than the bullet would have. Fix her. He knew that term. It was what men did to dogs that bit and horses that would not break. It was a term of ownership, of violent correction. Her own father had not just failed to protect her. He had opened the door. "I will not take you home," Taby vowed, his voice low and final. He turned the horse toward the river, toward the broken country where the canyons cut deep scars into the earth. There was a place he knew, a fissure in the rock wall obscured by willow and cottonwood, where the water ran clear and the sun could not reach until high noon. When they reached the sanctuary of the canyon, Tabe slid off the horse and pulled Nell down. Her legs buckled the moment they touched the ground. He caught her, carrying her to a patch of soft sand beneath the overhang of the cliff. He laid her down. Now, in the quiet, the extent of the damage was visible. Her neck was encircled by a raw, angry bruise where the rope had burned the skin away. There was a gash on her temple that was still oozing sluggishly. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing skin that was mottled with bruises shaped like fingers. Taby knelt beside her. He needed to clean the wounds before infection set in. The water in the stream was ice cold. He tore a strip from his own clean undershirt, dipping it into the river. "This will bite," he warned her. Nell was drifting in and out of consciousness. When the cold cloth touched her neck, she flinched, a whimper escaping her lips. Taby worked with a gentleness that belied his calloused hands. He washed the blood from her hair, his fingers moving carefully through the tangled blonde strands. He cleaned the grit from the rope burn. It was an intimate act, stripped of all romance. It was the intimacy of survival. He was touching her not to possess her, but to keep her from rotting. He saw her not as a woman to be desired, but as a life that had been nearly extinguished. Yet, as he wiped the dirt from her cheek, he felt a strange, fierce protectiveness rise in his chest. She was broken, yes, but she was still breathing. "Who did this?" he asked, though he knew the answer. Nell's eyes fluttered open. For the first time, they seemed to focus on him. She looked at his dark skin, his long hair, the knife at his belt. She should have been terrified. She was the white preacher's daughter, and he was the savage boogeyman of her father's sermons. But she did not scream. She looked at him with a profound, exhausted curiosity. "Rusk?" she whispered. "And everyone else." She closed her eyes again, her hand falling limp against the sand. Tabe sat back on his heels, wringing out the bloody cloth. The water turned pink as it flowed back into the stream. Back in Larkspur, the mood was electric, charged with a dark energy. Clayton Rusk stood on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, watching his men mount up. He held a cup of coffee in one hand and a cigar in the other. He did not look like a man whose plan had failed. He looked like a man who had just been dealt a new hand of cards. "She is gone, Mr. Rusk," the sniper reported, looking nervous. "A Comanche. He rode in like a ghost. Cut her down before I could get a clean shot." Rusk took a slow sip of his coffee. "A Comanche," he repeated, tasting the word. "You are sure? Saw the hair, saw the horse." Rusk smiled. It was a terrifying expression that did not reach his eyes. "Perfect. Sir, if she had died on the rope, she would be a martyr," Rusk explained, tapping the ash from his cigar. "People would cry. The Reverend would have to weep. It would be messy. But this she has been taken by a savage. Or better yet," he pointed toward the signal station where the words "Comanche lover" were still visible even from this distance. "She ran away with him." He turned to the gathering crowd. A few dozen men were listening, their faces a mixture of fear and eagerness. "Listen to me," Rusk bellowed. "The girl has been taken or she has fled either way. She is in the hands of the enemy. I'm putting a bounty on her head." He paused for effect. $500 for the man who brings her back. But listen close. I want her alive. She needs to stand before this town and confess her sins. We need to see the price of leaving the path of righteousness." "What about the Indians?" someone shouted. "Kill him," Rusk said dismissively. "Bring me his scalp, and I will give you another 100. But the girl breathes. She is the lesson. Do you understand?" The men cheered. $600 was a fortune. It was enough to buy a farm, or drink oneself to death for a decade. Inside the sheriff's office, Reverend Hart sat on a wooden chair, his head in his hands. He was trembling. "You cannot do this, Clayton," Hart whispered. "She is my daughter. You said it would just be a scare. You said you would cut her down before she was hurt." Rusk walked in, closing the door behind him. The noise of the crowd muffled to a dull roar. He placed a hand on the Reverend's shoulder, squeezing until Hart winced. "I am saving her soul, Reverend," Rusk said smoothly. "And I am saving your reputation. Think, if she comes back and says she was kidnapped, she is a victim. We can pity her. We can forgive her. But if she stays out there, if she chooses him, then she destroys you. She destroys this church." Hart looked up, his eyes rimmed with red. He was a weak man, hollowed out by years of pretending to be strong. "She is just a child," Hart pleaded. "She is a woman who made a choice." Rusk corrected him. "Now you have to make yours. Do you want to be the father of a whore who ran off with a savage, or do you want to be the grieving father whose daughter was stolen and needs to be rescued?" The Reverend lowered his head. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. "Bring her back," Hart whispered. "We will," Rusk promised. "We will bring her back, and we will wash her clean." Rusk walked out into the sunlight. He signaled to his lieutenant, a scarred man named Silas. "Get the dogs," Rusk said quietly, "and tell the boys to ride hard. They have a head start, but she is hurt. They will not get far." Out in the canyon, the sun was climbing higher, heating the red rocks. Tabe stood at the entrance of the crevice, watching the horizon. He could see the dust cloud rising from the direction of Larkspur. It was a large cloud, a lot of horses. He looked back at Nell. She was sleeping now, a fitful, pained sleep. He knew he could leave her. He could vanish into the terrain, and they would never find him. He could go back to his people, to the life that made sense. But he looked at the bruise on her neck. He looked at the way her hands were curled into fists, even in her sleep. She had said, "Don't take me home." Tabe checked the load in his revolver. He touched the pouch of ammunition in his belt. He had 40 rounds. It would not be enough to kill them all, but it would be enough to make them pay for every step they took. He went back to the stream and filled his canteen. He woke Nell gently. "We have to move," he said. She opened her eyes. The fever was brighter now. "Where?" "Away," Tabe said. "Can you ride?" "I don't know," she whispered. "You have to," he said, pulling her to her feet. She swayed, gasping as pain shot through her body, but she did not fall. She gritted her teeth, a flash of steel appearing in her eyes that Tabe had not seen before. "I will ride," she said. Tabe nodded. He lifted her onto the roan. He swung up behind her, wrapping his arm around her waist again. This time, she leaned back against him, not out of affection, but out of necessity. Her body was hot against his. "They are coming," Tabe said, spurring the horse into a trot. "Let them come," Nell murmured, staring at the canyon walls ahead. "I am not going back to that cage." They rode deeper into the Badlands, the horses' hooves clattering on the stone. Behind them, the dust cloud grew larger, a dark storm rolling across the prairie, hungry and relentless. The chase had begun, and in the heart of the Texas Panhandle, amidst the heat and the stone, two people who had been enemies by birth were now bound together by the only thing that mattered in the West, the will to survive the day. The alcove was cold, a shallow scoop in the sandstone wall that offered shelter from the wind, but little comfort for the body. Eleanor Hart woke to the smell of wood smoke and the sharp, copper taste of her own blood. For a moment, she lay paralyzed, the stone pressing hard against her hip, her mind drifting in the gray space between nightmare and waking. She waited for the sound of the church bell, for the heavy tread of her father's boots in the hallway. Instead, she heard the rhythmic scrape of a whetstone against steel. Memory returned like a physical blow. The rough scratch of the rope against her throat, the jeering faces of men she had known since childhood, the black letters burned into the wood of the signal station, "Comanche Lover." She sat up with a gasp, her hand flying to her neck. The movement sent a spike of nausea rolling through her gut. She scrambled backward until her spine hit the rock wall, her breath coming in short. Terrified hitches. She looked down at herself. Her dress, once a pale blue cotton meant for Sunday service, was torn at the hem and stained with mud. She felt dirty. She felt ruined. Tabe sat near the mouth of the alcove, his silhouette framed against the darkening sky. He did not look at her. He was sharpening his knife, the motion steady and calm. He had built a small fire, expertly shielded by rocks so the light would not carry across the canyon. Nell pulled her knees to her chest, trying to make herself small. She had been taught that men like him were animals. She had been taught that they took white women to defile them, to steal their souls. She waited for him to turn, to claim the prize that the town said he had already taken. Tabe sheathed the knife. He picked up a tin cup from near the fire and held it out to her. He did not move closer than necessary. "Drink," he said. His voice was deep, lacking the harsh cadence she expected. Nell stared at the cup. Her throat was on fire, swollen inside and out. She reached for it with a trembling hand. her fingers brushing his. He did not grab her. He did not leer. He simply let go of the cup the moment she had it. "Why?" she whispered, the word rasping over her damaged vocal cords. "Why am I here?" "Because the alternative was swinging," Tabe said. He turned his gaze to her then. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but devoid of the lust she had seen in Deputy Kincaid's eyes. "You are safe here, woman. I do not own you. I am not the one who put a rope around your neck." The word struck her with the force of a slap. "I do not own you." It was a sentiment she had never heard from her father, nor from the deputy, nor from any man in Larkspur. To them, she was property first to be guarded, then to be sold, and finally, when damaged, to be discarded. "They wrote." Nell choked up, unable to say the words. "They wrote it on the door. Everyone saw." "Ink on wood," Tabe said dismissively. "It washes off. Blood does not." "It is not true," she said, the tears spilling over now, hot and angry. I never touched you. I never touched anyone." "I know," Tabe said. He poked the fire with a stick. "So why did they want to kill you? A town does not hang a preacher's daughter for a lie unless the truth is more dangerous." Nell lowered the cup. The heat of the fire was beginning to thaw the numbness in her limbs, bringing the pain into sharp focus. She looked at Tabe, really looked at him. He was young, perhaps only a few years older than her, but he wore a stillness that made him seem ancient. "I found the book," she said softly. Tabe looked up. "What book?" "The ledger," Nell explained, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "Deputy Kincaid left it in the parlor when he was courting me. He thought I was too stupid to understand numbers. He thought I was just a girl staring at a needlepoint." She took a breath, the air whistling in her bruised throat. "It was a list, names of families, directions to homesteads near the water sources, and next to them, dates that have not happened yet, and prices." Tabe went still. "The fires," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Nell nodded. "They are burning them out. Rusk and the deputy. They hire men to dress like your people. They burn the barns and poison the wells. Then Rusk buys the land for pennies from the widows, and the deputy files the new deeds. I heard them laughing about it. I heard them say they needed to clear the path for the railroad survey. And they caught you," Tabe surmised. "I tried to steal the page," Nell said, shame coloring her cheeks. "I wanted to show my father. I thought I was a fool. I thought if he knew, he would stop it. But Kincaid caught me. He twisted my arm. He told my father I was hysterical. He told him." She closed her eyes. "He told him I had been sneaking out to meet a savage. He said I was tainted. He said the only way to save the town's soul was to make an example of me." "And your father believed him?" "My father," Nell said bitterly, "believes whatever keeps him comfortable. He looked at me, and he looked at the deputy, and he chose the lie. Because a daughter who is a whore is a tragedy he can pray over. But a daughter who exposes the law as criminals that would destroy his world." Tabe spat into the fire. "So they brand you a lover of Comanches. If you die, you are a lesson. If you live, no one listens to a woman who sleeps with the enemy. It is a smart trap." "I am ruined," Nell whispered. "Even if I live, I am ruined." "You are breathing," Tabe said, standing up. "That is a good start, but we cannot stay here. You have a silk dress and I have 6 bullets left. We need supplies, and we need to know what Rusk is planning next." "Where can we go?" Nell asked. "There is nowhere. They will have watchers on every road. We go to the one place they will not look yet," Tabe said. "We go back to Larkspur." The ride back toward the town was a descent into hell. They left the horse 2 miles out, tethered in a dry wash where the scrub oak grew thick. Tabe moved with a silence that unnerved Nell. He did not walk so much as flow over the terrain. She tried to mimic him, but her boots were loud on the gravel, and her breath was too ragged. They reached the outskirts of Larkspur an hour after moonrise. The town was not sleeping. Lanterns swung from the porches, and groups of men moved through the streets, guns resting easily on their shoulders. The air smelled of coal dust and aggressive righteousness. Taby pulled Nell into the shadow of a livery stable. A dog barked nearby, a sharp, repetitive sound that made Nell's heart hammer against her ribs. "Stay close," Tabe whispered. "If we are seen, do not run. Drop to the ground. I will draw their fire." "I am not leaving you to die," Nell hissed back, surprising herself. Tabe glanced at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Then try not to step on dry twigs." They moved through the alleyways, navigating the maze of trash barrels and stacked crates. They were heading for the Gilded Spur. It was madness, Nell thought. The saloon was the heart of the beast. But Tabe insisted that May Barlow was the only person in this God-forsaken territory who owed allegiance to nothing but her own conscience. As they rounded the corner of the general store, a door opened. Light spilled out onto the dirt, catching Nell full in the face. She froze. Standing in the doorway was Mrs. Gable, the town seamstress, a woman who had fitted Nell for her Easter dress 3 months ago, a woman who had given Nell hard candy when she was a child. Mrs. Gable held a bucket of slops. She stared at Nell. Her eyes went wide, reflecting the lantern light. She saw the torn dress, the bruised neck, the dirt. Nell pleaded with her eyes. "Please, you know me, Mrs." Gable's mouth opened. She took a breath to scream. Tabe moved. He did not strike the woman. He simply stepped out of the shadow, his hand resting visibly on the handle of his knife, his face grim and terrifying in the half-light. He brought a finger to his lips. The threat was implicit and overwhelming. "Mrs." Gable snapped her mouth shut. She looked savage to the girl, and then, with a look of pure revulsion directed not at Tabe, but at Nell, she stepped back inside and slammed the door. The lock clicked. "She will tell them," Nell whispered, shaking. "In 10 minutes, she will tell her husband. Then we have 5 minutes, Tabe said. He grabbed her hand the first time he had truly held it and pulled her into a run. They reached the back door of the Gilded Spur. Tabe did not knock. He used the blade of his knife to lift the latch, slipping inside like a shadow. They were in the storeroom, surrounded by kegs of beer and sacks of flour. The door to the main bar swung open, and May Barlow stepped in, carrying a tray of empty glasses. She stopped dead when she saw them. Her hand went to the pocket of her apron, where Nell knew she kept a derringer. "You have a death wish, boy?" May asked, her voice low and gravelly. She looked at Nell, her expression softening into something pained. "And you, child, look at you." "We need help. May," Nell said, stepping forward. "Please." May listened to the noise from the bar room, the raucous laughter, the shouting. "Rusk is out there," she said. "He is buying rounds for the house, celebrating the hunt. We need a place to hide until the moon sets," Tabe said. "And we need ammunition." May hesitated for a second, then nodded. "The cellar. Trapdoor is under the rug in the pantry. Go, now." The cellar was damp and smelled of vinegar and earth. May brought them down a lantern and a plate of cold beef and bread. She looked at Nell's neck and cursed softly, a string of profanities that would have made the Reverend faint. "He is planning a show, Nell," May said, keeping her voice to a whisper. "Rusk, he has called for a moral trial tomorrow at noon. He says if you are not found by then, he will try you in absentia. He is going to burn your effigy, and he is going to seize your father's land as restitution for the moral decay you brought to the community." "He wants the land," Nell said, clutching the bread but not eating. "It was never about me. It is the creek that runs through the parsonage lot." Tabe was ignoring the food. He was looking at a piece of paper pinned to the side of a crate, a notice Rusk had printed up, offering the reward for Nell. "This writing," Tabe said, tracing the letters. "The way the R curls, the heavy ink." "Rusk wrote it himself," May said. "He is proud of his penmanship. Says he was a schoolmaster in Ohio before the war." Tabe pulled a folded scrap of leather from his pouch. Inside was a piece of parchment, stained and wrinkled. He unfolded it and held it next to the reward poster. 2 winters ago, Tabe said, his voice cold. Before the soldiers came to burn my brother's lodge, we found this nailed to a tree. It warned us to leave or die. I kept it. The handwriting was identical. The same arrogant flourish on the capital letters. The same heavy hand. He has been doing this for years, Tabe realized. He is not just a bounty hunter. He is an architect. He creates fear, then he sells the solution. He provoked the war that killed my family so he could claim the valley. And now he is doing it to his own people, Nell said. She looked at May. Does anyone else know about the fraud? May sighed, rubbing her temples. Honey, half the town suspects, but they are scared. And the other half? They want to believe Rusk. They want to believe that if they just follow the rules and hate the right people, they will be safe. They want you gone. Nell, not because they hate you, but because looking at you makes them feel guilty. And people will kill to stop feeling guilty. Tabe stood up. We have what we need. We go... Go where? May asked. North. The pass is blocked by snow. West, Tabe said. To the high country. That is suicide, May said. Rusk has trackers. I am a better tracker, Tabe said simply. He turned to Nell. Are you ready? It will be cold, and it will be hard. Nell stood up. The food had settled her stomach, and the anger had settled her nerves. She looked at the poster with her name on it. $500. That was what she was worth to them. A bag of coins. She looked at Tab. He was waiting for her. Not pushing, not pulling, just waiting. Tabe, she said. It was the first time she had used his name. It felt strange on her tongue, but solid. If we run, we are just prey. We are just rabbits. Rabbits live, Tabe pointed out. I do not want to just live, Nell said, her voice trembling but gaining volume. I spent my whole life being safe. I spent 22 years being the good girl in the cage. And they still put a rope around my neck. She walked over to him, standing close enough to smell the wood smoke and the leather on him. She looked up into his dark eyes. I am not going to run away just to freeze in the mountains while he steals my home, she said. If I must die, Tabe, I want to die as one who chose not as a lesson they teach to children. Tabe looked at her for a long moment. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It transformed him, making him look less like a statue and more like a man who had just found a weapon he didn't know he had. Then we do not run, Tabe said. We hunt. May Barlow looked between the two of them, the savage and the Sunday school teacher, standing in the dim light of a wine cellar. She shook her head, a half smile touching her lips. You two are going to ruin this town, May said. Someone has to, Nell replied. Above them, the floorboards creaked as heavy boots walked over their heads. Rusk was upstairs. The monster was in the house. But down in the dark, the prey had just decided to become the predator. Tabe blew out the lantern. Let's go, he whispered. They moved back into the night, but the dynamic had shifted. They were no longer fleeing a tragedy. They were walking toward a war. The weather turned against them with the sudden, violent temper of the high plains. What had started as a biting wind curdled into a storm of ice and fury. The sky, previously a bruised purple, went pitch black, and hail the size of musket balls began to hammer the earth. Tabe and Nell had abandoned the open trail miles back, forced by the pursuit to scramble up a ridge of jagged limestone. The roan gelding, spooked by the thunder and the stinging ice, was fighting Tabe's grip on the reins. We cannot cross the ridge. 2. Tabe shouted over the roar of the wind. He had to lean close to Nell, shielding her face with his shoulder. The ice will cut us to ribbons. There is a cut in the rock. Nell pointed a trembling hand toward a dark fissure in the canyon wall, barely visible through the curtain of white hail. Up there! They scrambled toward it, the ground slick with mud and ice. Tabe slipped, his boot finding no purchase on the wet slate. He went down hard, his side scraping violently against a coil of rusted barbed wire, the remnants of a failed attempt by some long-gone settler to fence the unfenceable. He grunted a sharp, guttural sound, but scrambled back up. dragging the horse and guiding Nell until they collapsed into the shelter of the overhang. It was not a cave, merely a shallow depression in the rock face, deep enough to keep the hail off but open to the biting cold. They huddled at the back, the horse standing winded and shivering near the opening, blocking the worst of the draft. Tabe slid down against the stone wall, his hand pressing against his left side. When he pulled it away, his palm was dark. "You are hurt," Nell said. The panic of the flight was still thrumming in her veins, but seeing the blood on his hand shifted her focus. "Wire," Tabe grunted, tearing at the rip in his buckskin shirt. "Rusted. It is nothing." "It is not nothing if it festers," Nell said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, firmer, less like the whispery tones she used in the parsonage. She knelt beside him. "Let me see." Tabe looked at her. His eyes narrowed in the gloom. He was used to tending his own wounds, or having Blue Crow slap some poultice on them while making jokes about his clumsiness. He was not used to the touch of a white woman, especially one who smelled of lavender water and terror. "I do not have water to waste on washing it," Tabe warned. "We have ice," Nell said. She reached out to the lip of the cave, scooping a handful of the hail that was piling up. She held it in her hands until it began to melt, the cold biting her fingers. She tore a strip from her petticoat, another ruin of her fine dress, and dipped it in the slush. "This will burn." She echoed the words he had said to her earlier that day. Tabe gave a short, dry laugh. "Do it." She cleaned the gash. It was ugly, a jagged tear across his ribs, but not deep enough to hit an organ. As she worked, Tabe did not flinch, though she could feel the muscles of his abdomen jump involuntarily under her fingertips. It was a strange intimacy. Outside, the world was trying to freeze them to death. Inside, in the small bubble of body heat, she was touching the skin of a man her father preached was a soulless devil. He was not a devil. He was warm, he was solid, and he was bleeding because he had put his body between her and the storm. "You have steady hands," Tabe observed quietly. "For a girl who faints at the sight of a roast." "I never fainted," Nell corrected him, tying the bandage tight. "I just looked away." "A lady is supposed to look away from ugly things." "And now?" Tabe asked. Nell sat back on her heels, her hands resting on her knees. She looked at the bloody rag, then at the storm raging outside. "Now I think looking away is how the ugly things survive. If we look at them, we have to fight them." Tabe watched her. The firelight was non-existent, but the lightning flashing outside illuminated her face in strobe-like bursts. She looked exhausted, her hair wild, dirt smudged on her cheek. She looked beautiful, not in the way a painting is beautiful, but in the way a storm is. "Why do you live like this?" Nell asked suddenly. "Always running, always outside the walls." Tabe adjusted his position, wincing slightly. "Walls do not keep you safe, Nell, they just keep you ready for the slaughter. You saw the town. They live in fear. They fear the wind. They fear the night. They fear me. Fear makes men cruel. And you are not afraid?" "I am afraid of dying without a song," Tabe said. "I am afraid of forgetting who I am, but I am not afraid of the wind. The wind is just air that is in a hurry." He looked at the bandage on his side. "Freedom is not about doing whatever you want. That is a child's thought. Freedom is knowing that no one holds the pen that writes your name. No one writes on your skin but you." Nell wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. The cold was seeping through her torn dress. "They wrote to me," she whispered. "They wrote lover on the door. And my father, he wrote daughter on me. But he meant property." She looked down, her face flushing with a heat that had nothing to do with the fire. "I am 22 years old, Tabe, and I have never been with a man." Tabe looked at her, confused by the sudden confession. "That is your business." "No," Nell said, her voice shaking. "You do not understand. In my world, it is everyone's business. It is why I am valuable. It is why the deputy wanted me. I am a sealed letter. If the seal is broken, the letter is worthless." I was saving it. I was so terrified of losing it, of being spoiled, that I let them put me in a cage." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce and wet. "I am a virgin, Tabe, and right now, sitting here in the dirt, I hate it. I hate that it is the only thing they think I have to offer. I hate that my virtue is a weapon they use to choke me." The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Tabe shifted, moving closer to her, not to take, but to offer warmth. He unbuttoned his heavy buffalo hide coat and held it open. "Come here," he said. "You are freezing." Nell hesitated for a heartbeat, then moved into the circle of his arm. The coat was heavy and smelled of wood smoke and horse, a scent that was deeply, frighteningly masculine. She pressed against his side, careful of the wound. His heat was immense. It soaked into her shivering frame. "You are not a letter," Tabe said, his voice rumbling against her ear. "And you are not a coin to be spent. You are flesh and blood. You are the woman who walked into a cellar to arm herself against an army." Nell turned her face toward him. Their faces were inches apart. She could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. She could feel the rough stubble on his jaw, the danger outside the rusk, the posse. The cold felt 1,000 miles away. All that existed was the heat of his skin and the way he looked at her, not as a saint, not as a whore, but as a woman. Her heart hammered against her ribs, louder than the hail. "If I go back," Nell started, then stopped. "If I go back, I want to go back as myself, not the girl they think they know." She lifted her hand, her fingers trembling as she touched the high plane of his cheekbone. Tabe went still. He did not pull away, but he did not advance. He let her choose. He let her hold the pen. "Tabe," she whispered. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not a graceful kiss. Her teeth clicked against his, and she was shivering. But then Tabe's hand came up, cradling the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her matted hair. He deepened the kiss, slow and deliberate, tasting of rain and desperation. Nell made a sound in her throat, a small whimper of release. She pressed closer, trying to merge her cold body with his fire. The fear of the sin she had been warned about for 20 years evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, wonderful sense of rightness. She pulled back just an inch, breathless, her forehead resting against his. The gravity of what she was initiating hit her. "You'll ruin me," Nell moaned softly. It was half a question, half a realization. In the eyes of her father, in the eyes of Larkspur, this was the end of her life. Tabe let out a low, raspy laugh that vibrated through her chest. He looked at her with a fierce, reckless devotion. "Then I'll ruin myself, too," he said. He kissed her again, and this time, there was no hesitation. He pulled her fully inside the coat, wrapping them both in a cocoon of darkness and warmth. Nell's hands found the buttons of his shirt, clumsy but determined. She chose him, in the middle of a storm that wanted to kill them. She chose to burn. The hail continued to batter the stone, a relentless drumbeat. Inside the alcove, the world narrowed down to the sound of breathing, the friction of skin, and the reclaiming of a body that had been held hostage for too long. The morning sun was blinding. It reflected off the drifts of hail that still lay in the shadows like spilled diamonds. The sky was a hard, relentless blue, scrubbed clean by the storm. Nell woke first. She was stiff, her muscles aching from the ride and the cold, but she felt light. The heavy wool coat of virtue and shame she had worn for 22 years was gone. She looked at Tabe, sleeping next to her, one arm thrown protectively over her waist. She did not feel ruined. She felt forged. She sat up, adjusting her torn dress. She did not try to fix it. Let it be torn. She watched the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light entering the cave. Her mind, no longer clouded by panic, began to work with a cold, sharp clarity. She thought of the ledger she had tried to steal. She thought of the names. And then she thought of her father. Tabe stirred, his eyes opening instantly, alert. He looked at her, and for a second, Nell feared she would see regret in his eyes. She saw none, He looked at her with a quiet recognition. "The storm is broken," Tabe said, sitting up and wincing slightly as his wound stretched. "Yes," Nell said. She turned to him. "Tabe, I know where the proof is." Tabe reached for his boots. "The ledger you saw?" "No," Nell said, her mind racing, connecting the dots that had been there all along. The ledger was just Rusk's private record. It is illegal, but he could claim it was just notes, projections. But to steal the land, to actually take the title, he needs a legal transfer. "The courthouse is in the county seat. A 3-day ride," Tabe said. "Not the courthouse," Nell said, her eyes hardening. "The church, the parish registry." Tabe stopped, a boot half on. "Explain." "My father," Nell said, the realization tasting like bile. "He records the deaths. He records the last will and testaments of the parishioners. If a widow donates her land to the church, or if she signs a deed of sale before she dies, my father witnessed it. He stamps it." She grabbed Tabe's arm. "Don't you see Rusk burns them out? But he needs the paper trail to look clean. He needs a witness who is beyond reproach. My father falsifies the dates in the registry. He makes it look like they sold the land before the fire, or that they left it to the church, and the church sold it to Rusk. Your father is the key," Tabe said, his face darkening. "He is the lock," Nell corrected. "But there is someone else, Eli Cutter. The drunk, the one who sleeps behind the stables. He was a medic in the war," Nell said. "He acts as the coroner when the doctor is circuit riding. He signs the death certificates. If Rusk's men shoot someone and burn the house to hide the bullet holes, Cutter is the one who inspects the bodies. If he wrote accidental fire on those certificates, he knows everything." Tabe stood up, buckling his gun belt. The leather creaked a familiar, deadly sound. "Rusk is holding a trial at noon," Tabe said. "He plans to burn your image." "Then we need to be there," Nell said, standing up to meet him. "We need to get to Eli Cutter before noon, and we need to get that registry." "Going back is death," Tabe reminded her. "If they see us, they shoot. No questions." "They are looking for a frightened girl and a savage," Nell said. She picked up Tabe's knife from where it lay on the rock. She looked at her reflection in the blade her hair matted, her face dirty, her eyes clear and dangerous. "They won't find them." She handed the knife handle first to Tabe. "Cut my hair," she said. Tabe looked at her, surprised. "Your hair's your vanity. Your father calls it your crown." "It is a handle for them to grab," Nell said. "Cut it off. I'm done with vanity." Tabe took the knife. He gathered the long, blonde waves in his hand. He hesitated only a moment, looking into her eyes to ensure she meant it. She did, with a sharp rasp of steel through strands. He severed the heavy braid. It fell to the dusty floor of the cave, a golden rope that no longer bound her. Nell shook her head, the jagged ends brushing her shoulders. She looked younger, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. "Now," Nell said, "let's go ruin Clayton Rusk." They moved out of the cave and toward the horse. The dynamic had shifted entirely. Yesterday, Tabe had been dragging a victim up the mountain. Today, he was riding with a partner. They had 4 hours until noon. 4 hours to turn a hunt into a reckoning. The sun hung directly overhead, a white-hot coin pressed against the blue fabric of the sky, bleaching the color out of Larkspur. It was 12 o'clock, and the town square was packed. The air did not move. It sat heavy and thick, smelling of unwashed bodies, horse manure, and the copper tang of anticipated violence. In the center of the square, a makeshift gallows had been erected. It was not a professional job. It was a beam lashed across 2 high posts of the corral fence, with a rope dangling from the center. The noose turned slowly in the rising heat waves. Clayton Rusk stood on a crate beneath the rope. He wore a fresh coat, his beard trimmed, looking every inch the concerned patriarch. To his right stood Reverend Hart, a man reduced to a shadow of himself. The Reverend held his Bible with white-knuckled hands, his eyes fixed on the dirt, refusing to look at the crowd or the rope. "We are not here for vengeance," Rusk bellowed, his voice carrying to the back of the crowd where the wagons were circled. "We are here for purification. This town has a rot at its center, a rot of immorality that invites the savage to our doorstep." A murmur went through the crowd. They were frightened, and frightened people were easy to steer. At the edge of the crowd, near the alleyway behind the general store, the dust shifted. Two men lay flat on the roof of the livery stable, hidden by the parapet. Tabe checked the load of his Colt Navy. Beside him lay Blue Crow, a Comanche warrior 5 years his senior, with a face like carved oak and eyes that missed nothing. Blue Crow had been waiting in the hills, alerted by the smoke signals of the previous day, and had met Tabe at the rendezvous point just before the disaster struck. "They have her tight," Blue Crow said softly, looking through a brass spyglass. "3 men on the ground, the deputy on the platform. Rusk has the center." Tabe's jaw was set so hard it ached. They had been close. They had reached Eli Cutter's shack just as the sun rose. But Mrs. Gable had done her work well. The deputies had been waiting. They had taken Nell, dragging her screaming from the alley while Tab was forced back by a wall of rifle fire. He had not abandoned her. He had retreated to gather the only thing that could save her, now force. "We do not shoot to kill unless we must," Tabe said, his voice low. "If we turn this into a massacre, she dies in the crossfire. Then we make them look the other way," Blue Crow said, adjusting his rifle. Down in the square, the doors of the jailhouse opened. Nell Hart was dragged out. A collective gasp went through the crowd. She did not look like the Reverend's daughter anymore. Her fine dress was in tatters, stained with canyon mud. Her hair, once her crowning glory, was hacked short, jagged ends brushing her jawline, giving her a wild, exposed look. Her hands were bound behind her back. She did not weep. She walked with her head up, her eyes scanning the crowd, looking for the faces of the people she had known all her life. She saw judgment. She saw pity. She saw fear. Deputy Kincaid shoved her forward until she stumbled to the foot of the crate. "Behold," Rusk shouted, pointing an accusing finger at her, "the price of rebellion. She chose the bed of a savage over the sanctity of her own race. She conspired to bring the Comanche down upon us." He turned to the Reverend. "Reverend, read the scripture. Tell them what becomes of the harlot who betrays her people." Reverend Hart trembled. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Read it," Rusk hissed, his hand dropping to the pearl handle of his pistol. She shall be burned with fire," Hart whispered, the words barely audible. "For she hath played the whore in her father's house." "Louder," Rusk commanded. "Father," Nell said. Her voice was not a scream, but it cut through the heat like a blade. The Reverend looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Look at me," Nell said. "Do not look at him. Look at me. I am your daughter. I am the one who mends your vests. I am the one who reads to you." "You are ruined," Hart choked out. "I am free," Nell replied. "And you are the one in chains." Rusk struck her. It was a backhanded blow that sent her reeling against the post of the gallows. The crowd surged, some shouting in protest, others in agreement. "Enough talk," Rusk yelled. "String her up. Let her be a warning to any other woman who thinks she can wander off the path." Kincaid grabbed the noose. He moved to place it over Nell's head. Crack. A rifle shot echoed from the livery roof. The rope in Kincaid's hand severed a foot above the noose, the knot dropping harmlessly to the dust. "Comanche!" someone screamed. Panic erupted. The crowd scattered, people diving behind wagons and water troughs. Rusk's men spun around, rifles raised, searching for the shooter. Tabe vaulted from the roof to the top of a supply wagon, and then to the ground. He did not run like a man hiding. He ran like a thunderstorm. He moved through the confusion. Using the panic as cover, Blue Crow stayed high, his rifle speaking again, not hitting men, but shattering the lantern hanging above the jail door, kicking up dust at the feet of the deputies, creating a corridor of chaos. Tabe reached the platform. Kincaid saw him and drew his weapon, but Tabe was faster. He did not shoot. He slammed the barrel of his revolver into Kincaid's temple. The deputy went down like a sack of grain. Tabe grabbed Nell, spinning her around and slashing the ropes binding her wrists. He pulled her behind the thick oak post of the corral fence. "You came back," Nell breathed, her hands grasping his shirt. "I told you," Tabe said, scanning the square. "I ruined myself, too." "There," Rusk screamed, pointing at them. "Kill them both, $500 for the man who drops them." His hired guns leveled their weapons. Tabe pushed Nell down, shielding her with his body. He raised his revolver, ready to die to buy her a few seconds. "Hold your fire!" The voice was a roar, amplified by the confined space of the square. It did not come from the lawmen. It came from the saloon. May Barlow stepped out of the gilded spur. She carried a double-barreled shotgun, broken open over her arm. But it was not the weapon that stopped the crowd. It was the man she was dragging with her. Eli Cutter was unshaven, smelling of gin, but he was wearing his old army coat, the brass buttons polished. He carried a leather satchel. "Anyone fires a shot," May shouted, "and I will blow a hole in the whiskey barrel and burn this town down myself." The threat to the alcohol was effective. The guns lowered slightly. "Mr. Rusk," Eli Cutter shouted, his voice shaking but gaining strength as he walked into the center of the killing ground. "I have something of yours." Rusk's eyes narrowed. "Get that drunk out of here." "I am a drunk," Cutter admitted, stopping 10 feet from the platform. "But I was also a surgeon in the Army of the Potomac, and I know the difference between a burn victim and a man who was shot before he burned." The silence in the square was absolute. Even the horses seemed to stop stamping. Cutter reached into his satchel. He pulled out a sheaf of papers, blackened, water-damaged, but legible. "I kept the records," Cutter announced to the town. "The Jameson family, the Miller family, the boy from the creek. Rusk said they died in Comanche raids. He said they burned in their beds." Cutter held up a jagged piece of lead. "I pulled this from the Jameson boy's spine. It is a .44 caliber slug, standard issue for a bounty hunter. Not an arrow." "He lies," Rusk shouted, his face flushing a dark, ugly red. "He is drunk on Indian whiskey. And this," May Barlow stepped forward, pulling a piece of wood from her apron. It was a piece of the doorframe from the signal station, bearing the charred letter R from the words, "Comanche Lover." She held it up next to a piece of paper, the threatening letter Tabe had given her. "Look at the hand," May yelled. "Look at the curl of the letters. The man who wrote the threat to the tribe 2 years ago is the same man who wrote the shame on that door. He created the war. He hired men to dress in feathers and paint to burn your farms so he could buy the land for pennies." Nell stood up. Tabe tried to hold her back, but she shook her head. She stepped out from behind the post, not as a victim, but as an accuser. "He does not care about my virtue," Nell's voice rang out, clear and devastating. "He wants the creek that runs through the parsonage. He wants the water rights for the railroad." She turned to her father, who was still kneeling on the platform. "Father," she said, Tell them about the dates in the registry. Tell them how he made you change the dates of death so he could claim the deeds were signed while they were alive." Reverend Hart looked at his daughter. He looked at the short hair, the bruised face, and the eyes that were no longer the eyes of a child. He looked at Clayton Rusk, who was staring at him with a look of pure, reptilian malice. The Reverend stood up. His legs were shaking, but he stood. "It is true," Hart said. The words were quiet, but in the silence, they sounded like thunder. I forged the dates. He said it was for the good of the town. He said we needed the railroad." "Ah, traitor," Rusk roared. He backhanded the Reverend, sending the older man sprawling off the crate into the dust. The crowd broke. The spell of fear was shattered by the weight of the evidence. Men who had been ready to hang now lowered their rifles. A low growl started in the throat of the mob, turning from the girl to the man in the fine coat. "You used us," a farmer in the front row said, stepping forward. "You killed my brother and said it was Indians, and you bought his farm for $10. Rusk looked around. He saw his control evaporating like water on a hot skillet. His cavalry looked uneasy. They were mercenaries, not martyrs, and they could count the odds. Blue Crow was still on the roof. Tabe was on the ground, and the town was waking up. "You are all fools," Rusk screamed, backing up against the gallows post. "I brought you civilization, I brought you an order, and this is how you repay me, by listening to a whore and a drunk." He looked at Nell. The hatred in his eyes distilled into a singular burning point. If he could not have the land, he would take satisfaction. "You first," Rusk snarled. He raised his pistol, leveling it straight at Nell's chest. There was no time for the crowd to rush him. There was no time for May to raise her shotgun. Tabe did not scream. He did not hesitate. He did not think about the law or the consequences. He stepped out from the cover of the post, exposing himself fully to draw Rusk's eye. But Rusk was fixated on Nell. Tabe raised his Colt. He took a breath, finding the stillness in the center of the hurricane. He fired one shot. The bullet did not strike Rusk in the heart. Tabe was not an executioner. He was a protector. The lead ball struck Rusk's right hand, shattering the metacarpals and the pearl grip of his pistol. Rusk screamed, a high, thin sound, dropping the gun as his hand exploded in a spray of red. He fell to his knees, clutching his ruined hand to his chest. Silence slammed back into the square. Tabe stood there, smoke curling lazily from the barrel of his gun. He did not lower it. He walked forward, placing himself between Nell and the fallen man. He did not say a word. He did not need to. His presence was a wall of iron. Deputy Kincaid stirred, trying to reach for his fallen weapon. Blue Crow's rifle cracked from the roof, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from Kincaid's nose. The deputy froze, raising his hands slowly. The other mercenaries looked at Rusk, bleeding in the dirt, and then at the angry townspeople who were now picking up rocks and fence rails. They slowly holstered their guns and backed away. Hands raised, Nell walked over to Rusk. She looked down at him. He was whimpering, staring at his mangled hand, his dignity stripped away to reveal the small, vicious coward beneath. "You called me a savage lover," Nell said softly. "But he is the only man here who did not try to murder an unarmed woman." She turned to the crowd. They were looking at her, really looking at her, for the first time, not as a symbol of sin, but as a survivor. "Go home," Nell said to them. "The show is over." May Barlow walked up to the gallows. She took a knife from her belt and slashed the remaining rope that held the noose. The heavy loop of hemp fell to the ground, coiling in the dust like a snake that had lost its venom. Reverend Hart pulled himself up from the dirt. He tried to approach Nell, his hands reaching out. "Nell, daughter!" Nell stepped back, standing closer to Tabe. She did not look at her father with hatred, but with a distant, heartbreaking pity. "Go home, father," she said. "I think you have a lot of praying to do." Tabe holstered his gun. He put a hand on Nell's shoulder. It was a light touch, grounding her. She leaned into it, her knees finally beginning to shake as the adrenaline faded. The wind picked up, swirling the dust around the fallen noose and the bleeding man. The town of Larkspur stood silent, the judgment of God having been replaced by the messy, undeniable truth of men. The climax had broken the fever. Now, they would have to live with the scars. The dust in the town square of Larkspur did not settle quickly. It hung in the air, a golden mist illuminated by the midday sun, tasting of gunpowder and the sour sweat of a mob that had suddenly lost its appetite for blood. Clayton Rusk was no longer the architect of the town's morality. He was a heap of expensive wool and agony, curled in the dirt, clutching a hand that was now little more than a ruin of bone and gristle. The silence that followed the gunshot was heavy, broken only by Rusk's high, thin whimpering. Deputy Kincaid, seeing the shift in the wind, made his move. He scrambled away from the gallows platform, his hands raised high, his face slick with panic. "I was following orders," Kincaid shouted, his voice cracking. He looked at the crowd, desperate to find an ally. "You all heard him. Rusk ran the show. I just filed the papers. I did not know about the fires, I swear on my mother's grave." The crowd did not move to help him. The men who had been ready to hang a girl 5 minutes ago now looked at their boots, or at the sky. Anywhere but at the deputy. The spell of righteousness had broken, leaving behind the ugly residue of their own complicity. They had been ready to kill a neighbor to feel safe. Now, with the truth laid bare by a drunk doctor and a saloon keeper, that safety felt like a coat made of lead. 2 of the town elders, men who owned the livery and the dry goods store, stepped forward. They did not look heroic. They looked tired and ashamed. They took Kincaid by the arms. "Quiet down, Kincaid," the livery owner said, his voice grim. "We will lock you in your own cell until the circuit judge comes through next month." "And him," Kincaid squealed, nodding toward Rusk. "Dr. Cutter," the store owner said, turning to the disheveled man standing by the water trough. "Patch him up. We want him alive for the hanging." Eli Cutter nodded, his hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline faded, but his eyes were clear. He walked toward Rusk, opening his bag. It was not an act of mercy, but of professional duty. Rusk flinched away, his eyes wide and terrified, staring at Taby, who still stood like a sentinel between him and the girl. "He won't shoot you again," Cutter grunted, kneeling beside Rusk. "He shoots to stop, not to murder, which is more than I can say for you." Tabe slowly lowered the hammer of his Colt. He holstered the weapon, the leather creaking in the silence. He did not look at the townspeople. He looked only at Nell. She was standing by the post of the gallows, shivering despite the heat. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving her knees weak and her mind reeling. She looked at the rope lying in the dust. It looked like a dead snake. Then there was a movement on the platform. Reverend Hart pushed himself up. His cheek was swelling where Rusk had struck him, a purple bruise blooming against his pale skin. He looked out at his congregation. For 20 years, he had stood above them, thundering about sin and damnation. Now, he stood below them, a man who had sold his own child for a quiet life. He stepped down from the crate. He stumbled slightly, and no one rushed to steady him. He walked through the dust toward Nell. Tabe tensed, his hand hovering near his gun, but Nell reached out and touched his arm. "It is all right," she whispered. Hart stopped 3 feet from her. He looked at her jagged hair, cut with a hunting knife. He looked at the bruises on her neck where the rope had burned her the day before. He looked at the man standing beside her, the Comanche warrior he had demonized from the pulpit. "Eleanor," Hart said. His voice was a husk. "Father," she replied. She did not sound angry. She sounded exhausted. "I thought—" Hart started, then stopped. He swallowed hard. "I thought I was keeping the wolves away, but I opened the door for them." "You were the wolf, Father," Nell said softly. "You and the town. You ate your own because you were too scared to starve." Hart closed his eyes. Tears leaked out, tracking through the dust on his face. He looked small, the vestments of his office, usually so imposing, hung on him like a costume that no longer fit. "I cannot undo it," he whispered. "I cannot wash the ink from the registry. I cannot take back the words I read." "No," Nell agreed. "You cannot." Hart looked at the crowd. He took a breath, a shuddering intake of air. Then, deliberately, he unbuttoned his clerical collar. The stiff white strip of celluloid came loose in his hand. He dropped it into the dirt. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his daughter. It was not a graceful embrace. He clung to her, burying his face in her shoulder, sobbing with the ugly, heaving cries of a man whose world has collapsed. Nell stood rigid for a moment. Every instinct in her body, honed by years of discipline, told her to comfort him, to tell him it was all right, to be the good girl. But she did not. She did not pat his back. She did not say it was forgiven. She simply stood there, letting him hold her, letting him feel the reality of her living, breathing body. She was solid. She was alive, and she was no longer his. "I am going," Nell said into his ear. Hart pulled back, looking at her face. He saw the resolve there. He saw the steel that Tabe in the canyon had forged. "Where?" he asked. "Away," she said. To a place where my name is what I say it is. Hart nodded. He did not argue. He did not quote scripture. He looked at Tabe. The two men stared at each other, the preacher and the warrior. There was no handshake, no reconciliation of cultures, just an acknowledgement of a shifting tide. Keep her safe, Hart said to Tabe. She keeps herself safe. Tabe replied calmly. I just walk beside her. The crowd parted as they walked toward the gilded spur. No one spoke. A few men took off their hats as Nell passed, a gesture of respect that came too late to matter. They walked past the wagons, past the church with its closed doors, and into the dim, cool sanctuary of the saloon. Inside, the adrenaline crash hit them both. May Barlow locked the doors and flipped the sign to closed. She poured 4 glasses of whiskey, her hands steady now that the shotgun was back under the bar. Drink, she ordered. It is medicinal. Nell sat at a table, her hands shaking so hard she had to use both to lift the glass. The whiskey burned, going down. A clean, sharp fire that chased away the chill of the gallows shadow. They will not hold Rusk forever, May said, leaning against the bar. He has money in St. Louis. He has lawyers. In a month, maybe 2, he will be out. He will be out, Eli Cutter agreed, wiping his glasses with a dirty rag. But he is finished here. The town knows. Once the money is gone, the fear goes with it. He is just a cripple with a bad reputation now. And you, Tabe asked, looking at May and Eli. You stood against him. When his friends come, or when the town remembers that they hate the truth-tellers more than the liars. What then? May shrugged. She looked around her saloon, at the scarred wood and the dusty bottles. I have run this place for 15 years. I know every secret in Larkspur. If they want to run me out, they better be ready for me to start talking about whose husband visits whose wife on Tuesday nights. She smiled, but it was a tired smile. We will be fine. Tabe, we are the weeds. You cannot kill us. Nell looked at her reflection in the dark liquid of her glass. She saw a stranger, a woman with short hair and a bruised neck. I can't stay, Nell said quietly. Even if they don't hang me, I can't walk down these streets and see them looking at me. They will always see the rope. And I cannot stay, Tabe said. He was standing by the window, watching the street through a crack in the curtains. They are looking at me now. Not like a dog, but like a story. They are already making it a legend. The Indian who shot the gun out of the hand. I do not want to be a legend. Legends are easy to shoot. Where will you go? Eli asked. North, Tabe said. Towards the Canadian River. The grass is good there, and the people are few. Nell looked up at him. North, she repeated. It wasn't a question. It was an agreement. They spent the afternoon in the saloon, gathering supplies. May packed saddlebags with dried beef, flour, coffee, and a heavy wool blanket. Eli Cutter cleaned Nell's neck wound again, applying a salve that smelled of mint and turpentine. It will scar, Cutter told her gently. Nell touched the bandage. Good. I want to remember. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and violet, a blue crow appeared at the back door. He led Tabe's roan and a second horse, a mare with a white blaze that he had acquired from the chaos of the livery stable. The way is clear, Blue Crow said in his own tongue, which Tabe translated for Nell. But we should not linger. The snake is wounded, but the venom is still in the blood of this place. Blue Crow would not go with them. He had his own path, back to the dwindling bands of the Quahadi. He clasped Tabe's forearm, a warrior's goodbye, and vanished into the alleyway as silently as smoke. Tabe and Nell mounted up. May Barlow came out to the porch. She handed Nell a small bundle, a comb, and a mirror. You don't need to be vanity, May said softly, but you deserve to see yourself. Thank you, May, Nell said, for the gun and the truth. Go on, May waved them off, her eyes wet. Get out of here before I start charging you for the whiskey. They rode out of Larkspur as the twilight deepened. They did not look back at the church. They did not look back at the parsonage where the roast was likely still sitting cold on the table. But they did not ride directly north. Tabe guided them on a detour, circling back toward the ridge that overlooked the town. "Where are we going?" Nell asked, her voice stronger now, catching the rhythm of the horse. "One last thing," Tabe said. "To close the circle." They rode up the shale slope until the blackened skeleton of the old signal station loomed out of the darkness. It stood like a rotten tooth against the stars. The door, where the hateful words had been burned, was still barred shut. Tabe dismounted. He gathered an armful of dry sagebrush and dead juniper branches. He piled them against the wooden door. "It stands as a warning," Tabe said. "As long as it stands, they will remember the fear. They will remember that this is where they leave their hate." He struck a lucifer match against his boot heel. The flame flared, bright and sudden in the blue dark. He tossed it into the brush. The dry wood caught instantly. The fire crawled up the door, licking at the letters. Comanche lover, the old, dry timber of the station, seasoned by years of drought, went up like paper. Nell watched the flames rise. She felt the heat on her face, hotter than the shame had ever been. She watched the roof collapse in a shower of sparks that drifted up toward the Milky Way. "It is gone," she whispered. Tabe stood beside her, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "Fire cleans," he said. "Now the land can breathe." Nell looked at a piece of wood that had fallen clear of the fire, a smooth plank from the porch railing, untouched by the flames but covered in soot. She dismounted and walked over to it. She picked up a piece of cold charcoal from the ground. "What are you doing?" Tabe asked. "Writing my own name," Nell said. She went to a sturdy fence post that marked the edge of the station's lot, one of the few things that would survive the inferno. With steady, deliberate strokes, she wrote on the pale wood. She did not write victim. She did not write survivor. She did not write harlot. She wrote one word, in large, defiant letters, chosen. She stepped back. The word stood out black against the grain. "They said I was taken," Nell said, looking at Tabe. "They said I was stolen property, but I was not taken. Tabe, I chose it. I chose to live, I chose to fight, and I chose you." Tabe looked at the word, and then at her. The stoicism he wore like armor cracked, revealing a profound, quiet tenderness. "And I chose you," he said. "Forever." He did not kiss her then. It was too solemn a moment for that. He simply took her hand, his calloused fingers interlacing with hers. The signal station burned behind them, a beacon that marked the end of an era for Larkspur. The town below would see the fire. They would wonder if it was Rusk's vengeance or God's judgment, but they would never know it was simply a woman closing the door on her past. "Let's go home," Nell said. "We have no home," Tabe reminded her gently. Nell smiled, and for the first time in years, the smile reached her eyes. She looked at the vast, open prairie stretching out under the moon, wild and terrifying and beautiful. "We have the earth," she said, "and we have tomorrow. That is enough." They turned their horses toward the North Star. The wind blew cold and clean from the mountains, smelling of pine and snow. It was a hard wind, a wind that would strip the flesh from the weak. But they were not weak. They were the chosen. And as they rode into the darkness, the fire behind them burned the last of the lies to ash. The winter of 1876 came down from the Rockies like a starving wolf, howling through the cracks in the walls and testing the strength of every timber Tabe had set. It was a season that killed the weak and hardened the strong. But when the snow finally retreated, bleeding into the earth to feed the roots of the sagebrush, the cabin by the Canadian River was still standing. It was not a palace. It was a rough structure of cottonwood logs and river clay, with a roof that still leaked in two places when the rain blew from the east. But it held. Nell Hart, though she rarely answered to that name now, preferring simply Nell, stood by the corral fence, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of a gloved hand. She was watching a young Mustang mare circle the enclosure. The horse was wild, its eyes showing white rims of panic. But Nell did not flinch. She stood in the center of the ring, a coiled rope in her hand, her voice a low, steady hum that cut through the animal's fear. She wore trousers made of buckskin, stained with grease and grass. Her hair, once the obsession of a town that wanted to own her, had grown out into a manageable length that brushed her shoulders, tied back with a strip of leather. She looked nothing like the girl who had fainted at the sight of a dry roast. She looked like the land itself, weathered, enduring, and alive. Tabe was on the roof of the smokehouse, hammering a loose shingle. He paused, watching her. He saw the way she moved with the horse, not forcing it, but guiding it. She had learned the language of the plains faster than he had expected. She could shoot a rabbit at 50 paces with the Winchester he had given her. She could dress a wound without her hands shaking. She could ride for 10 hours without complaining. But more importantly, Tabe had learned too. He looked at the hammer in his hand. For most of his life, his hands had held weapons, bows, lances, colts, knives. He knew how to take life. He knew how to break things. But here, on this bend of the river where the willows dragged their fingers in the water, he was learning to build. He was learning that there was a different kind of honor in coaxing corn out of the hard earth, or in fixing a hinge so a door would close against the wind. He climbed down the ladder, his boots heavy on the packed earth. He walked over to the corral, leaning his arms on the top rail. "She is stubborn," Tabe noted, nodding at the mare. "She is scared," Nell corrected him, not taking her eyes off the horse. "She thinks the rope means a trap. I have to show her it means a connection." She flicked her wrist, and the loop of the lariat settled gently over the mare's neck. The horse reared, but Nell stepped forward, giving slack instead of pulling tight. The mare settled, blowing air through her nostrils. "Connection," Tabe repeated. It was a strange concept for a world that ran on conquest. They had built more than a cabin here. They had built a law. It was not written on paper, and it was not enforced by a sheriff with a tin star. It was a simple code, spoken over the fire on their first night in the finished cabin. No chains, no debts of blood. If you eat, you work. If you stay, you are family. And the lost ones had found them. It had started with a wagon that limped into their valley 3 months ago. The axle was broken, dragging in the dirt. The driver was a black man named Silas, a former Buffalo soldier who had grown tired of shooting Indians for a government that would not let him sit at the same table. His wife, Sarah, was a white woman from Missouri with eyes that had seen too much hate. They had been run out of 3 towns. They were starving. Tabe had ridden out to meet them, his hand on his gun. But he had not drawn it. He had looked at the way Silas stood in front of his wife, ready to die to protect her. He recognized the look. Now, Silas was down by the river, checking the fish traps. Sarah was in the garden, showing a young boy how to weed between the rows of squash. The boy, barely 12 years old, was an orphan they had found shivering in a root cellar in a ghost town miles to the east. He did not speak much, and he jumped at loud noises, but he had stopped hiding food in his pockets. And then there was Lucas, the man who wanted to stop drinking. He had stumbled into their camp shaking from delirium tremens. Nell had nursed him through the sweats and the screaming nights. Now, he was the one splitting wood behind the cabin, the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the axe a heartbeat for their small community. They were a collection of broken things that had fitted themselves together into a mosaic. "A rider is coming," Tabe said suddenly. Nell stiffened. She dropped the rope and climbed over the fence in one fluid motion. She grabbed her rifle from where it leaned against the post. Old habits died hard. A rider usually meant trouble. They watched the figure approach along the river road. The horse was old, a mule-eared cob that looked ready to collapse. The rider sat slumped in the saddle, wearing a coat that was dusty and threadbare. As he drew closer, Nell lowered the rifle. "It is my father," she said. Tabe did not relax. He remembered the man who had stood on the gallows platform and condemned his own blood. "Do you want me to turn him away?" "No," Nell said. "Let him come." Reverend Hart looked 20 years older than the day he had unbuttoned his collar in the Larkspur Square. His face was lined with deep crevices of regret. He pulled the horse to a stop and looked at the homestead. He saw the smoke rising from the chimney. He saw the black man and the white woman laughing by the river. He saw the savage warrior standing beside his daughter, not as a captor, but as an equal. He dismounted stiffly. He did not hold a Bible. He held a small sack of grain. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was quiet, lacking the thunder of the pulpit. "Hello, Father," Nell replied. She did not hug him. That bridge was still being built, stone by heavy stone. "You look tired." "I am," Hart admitted. "I left the church. Or rather, the church left me. They wanted a man who could preach fire without burning himself. I could no longer do that." He held out the sack. "Peach stones, from the tree in the parsonage garden. I thought you might want to plant them here. The soil looks good." It was a peace offering. It was an admission that this place, this wild, unfenced land, was her home now. "Thank you," Nell said, taking the sack. "You can water the horses, Father, and then you can eat, but you have to chop the wood for the fire tonight. That is the rule." Hart looked at the axe Lucas was using. He looked at his own soft hands, hands that had only ever turned pages. He nodded. "I can chop wood," he said. "I would like to learn to be useful." He stayed for 3 days. He did not try to bring her back. He did not pray over their food unless asked. He mostly watched. He watched Tabby explain to the orphan boy how to track a deer. He watched Nell deliver a calf in the middle of the night, covered in muck and glory. He watched the way Tabe and Nell looked at each other, a look of such profound, quiet understanding that it made the Reverend look away, ashamed of the hollow marriages he had blessed for money. On the morning he left, he handed Nell a letter from May Barlow. "She gave this to me in town," Hart said. "She said you would want to know." Nell waited until he was a speck on the horizon before she opened it. She sat on the porch, Tabe sitting on the step below her, whittling a piece of cedar. "Dear Nell, the town is quiet. Rusk's trial was a farce, as we expected. His lawyers from the East argued that he was a businessman protecting his investments. He got 5 years in a federal prison, but everyone knows he will be out in 2. But he will not come back here. His hand is ruined. He cannot hold a gun, and a man who cannot hold a gun in Texas is just a mouth. May." Nell folded the letter. She looked out at the river. She thought of Rusk sitting in a cell. She thought of the fear that had once ruled her life. "I need to write back," she said. She went inside and found her pen and ink. The paper was coarse, traded from a trapper for a side of bacon. She wrote quickly, the words flowing from a place of certainty she had never possessed in the parsonage. "Dear May, do not worry about Rusk. He is the past. We are building something else here. We have a roof that does not leak often, and we have enough venison to last the winter. My father came. He is trying to learn to be a man instead of a monument. It is hard work for him, but he is trying. You asked me once what it felt like to run away. I did not run away. May, I ran toward... I used to think freedom was just the absence of a cage. I thought it meant being alone, but I was wrong. Freedom starts when I stop asking for permission to breathe. It starts when I look at the horizon and do not see a wall, but a question I get to answer. Come visit us in the spring. The peach trees might be sprouting. Nell." That evening, the wind died down, leaving the air crisp and smelling of cedar smoke. The others had gone to sleep in the bunkhouse they had raised. Tabe and Nell sat by the fire in the main cabin. The light played across the log walls, casting long, dancing shadows. Nell was sewing a button on Tabe's shirt. It was a domestic task, one she had done 1,000 times for her father. But this felt different. She was not mending a vestment for a role. She was caring for the man. Tabe watched her hands. "Your father," Tabe said, his voice a low rumble. "He chopped the wood well enough, but he blisters easily." "He will toughen up," Nell said, biting the thread. "Or he won't come back. That is his choice." "Choice," Tabe mused. "It is a heavy thing to carry." "It is the only thing worth carrying," Nell replied. She handed him the shirt. Tabe took it, but he did not put it on. He tossed it onto the chair and reached for her hand. His grip was warm, his skin rough against hers. He pulled her gently from the chair until she was kneeling between his legs on the hearth rug. He looked at her face. He traced the faint white scar on her neck where the rope had burned her. It was fading, but it would never be gone. "In my tribe," Tabe said quietly, "when a man and a woman join, there are gifts, horses, blankets, feasts. We have no horses to spare." Nell smiled. "And we ate the feast for dinner." "I have no horses for you," Tabe said, his eyes serious. "I have no land that the government recognizes. I have a name that curses half the territory." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. "But I have this. I wake up every morning, and the sky is big, and the wind is cold, and I could go anywhere. I could ride to the mountains. I could ride to Mexico." Nell's breath hitched. "You could—" "But I do not," Tabe whispered. "I stay. Not because the snow blocks the pass, not because of the cabin. I stay because you are here." He pulled back to look into her eyes, the firelight reflecting the absolute, unshakable truth in them. "I do not need a paper from the church. Nell, I do not need a judge to tell me where I belong. I look at you, and I see the place where I stand." He brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "You said I would ruin you," he said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You did," Nell whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "You ruined the girl who was afraid. You killed her." "Good," Tabe said. "Because I do not want the girl who was afraid. I want the woman who burned the door." He kissed her then. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the cave during the storm. It was slow. It was deep. It tasted of smoke and time and the quiet assurance of tomorrow. It was a kiss that settled into her bones, grounding her to the earth and to him. "I chose you," Tabe murmured against her lips, sealing the vow that was stronger than any wedding band. "I chose you forever." Outside, the river flowed on, carving its path through the stone, indifferent to the laws of men. The coyotes sang to the moon, a wild, lonely chorus that was no longer frightening, but welcoming. Inside the cabin, the fire popped, sending a spark up the chimney to join the stars. The storm was over. The bow had not broken, and in the heart of the wild country, two people had found the only thing that could survive the winter, the will to stay. Epilogue. 2 years later. In the town of Larkspur, spring arrived with a vengeance. The rains had been heavy, washing away the last of the soot from the ruins of the signal station on the ridge. The town had changed. Rusk was gone, a memory that people spoke of only in hushed tones, a boogeyman to scare children. The deputy was in jail. The new sheriff was a man who walked instead of strutted, high on the ridge, where the gallows of the signal station had once stood. The charred wood had finally rotted away, returning to the soil, but the ground was not bare. From the ashes of the hate that had been burned there, a carpet of wildflowers had erupted, bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, their roots deep in the scarred land, bloomed in a riot of blue and red. They covered the spot where the noose had swung. They grew over the charcoal remnants of the door. A hawk circled overhead, crying out in the thin air. It looked down at the flowers, waving in the wind. There was no sign of the violence that had happened there. There was only the relentless, beautiful insistence of life, pushing up through the dark to find the sun. The rope was gone. The flowers remained. And to the north, where the river ran free, a chimney was smoking, signaling that the chosen were home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dust and the fire, and I hope you felt every mile of it. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you in a cabin in the woods, a city apartment, or somewhere in between? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Tabe and Nell's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of the American West, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Don't forget to like the video and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who love a good yarn about love, survival, and the price of freedom. Until the next time, keep your powder dry and your eyes on the horizon.